In this lecture, we will focus on the history of and the patterns observed in biological evolution. Evolution means any continuous unidirectional change. Organic evolution states that all life on Earth is descended from other life and has transformed from, at times, very different ancestors. All life is linked by ancestry and descent. Phylogeny is the term for the ancestor-descendant relationship. We are going to explore the history of evolution by starting with pre-Darwinian evolution and some of the most important concepts and contributions. The Comte de Buffon defined species. He stated that each species is a separate entity and that no species can interbreed with another species. Buffon also claimed that organisms are molded by their environment. Buffon was the first to describe that inheritance or traits from parents and adaptation to environment shaped organisms, but he proposed no mechanism or processes by which this occurred. Erasmus Darwin, Charles Darwin's grandfather, formulated one of the first formal theories on evolution in zoonomia, or the laws of organic life. He proposed that competition for security, for survival, for food, and for mates could cause changes in species. He used his observations of domesticated animals and the behavior of wildlife to come up with this proposal. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, a French naturalist, devised a scientific way to present findings. He was the first to propose a mechanism by which the gradual change of species might take place. He extended the definition of the change over time, stating that life started out simple and became more complex. He described a two-part mechanism by which change was gradually introduced into the species and passed down through generations. The first part of the two-part mechanism is the idea of use and disuse, which states that the use, or conversely, the disuse, could change a trait. The second part is the inheritance of acquired traits, which suggests that traits changed or acquired over an individual's lifetime could be passed down to its offspring. This illustration visually explains Lamarck's two-part mechanism very simply. On the left, you see a giraffe that does not use or stretch his neck to browse. On the right, a giraffe that uses and stretches his neck to browse. Over time, the giraffe on the right gains a longer neck and legs, while the giraffe on the left remains the same. Both giraffes pass their acquired traits to their offspring. Now, Lamarck's inheritance of acquired traits was incorrect, but there are many things that he got right. His idea that evolutionary change takes place gradually and constantly is correct. He studied ancient seashells and noticed that the older they were, the simpler they appeared. And he correctly concluded that species started out simple and consistently moved toward complexity, or as he termed it, closer to perfection. The evidence or pattern of evolution as we know it today is considered Darwinian evolution. Charles Darwin developed two main concepts from his observations of the fossil record that we are familiar with and the natural world. The first is his concept of common descent, which says that all descendants have evolved from a common ancestor. His second and most widely known concept is natural selection. Darwin collected and cataloged meticulously using multiple resources, and he determined that if man could select traits over a short range, then nature could do the same, but over a greater period of time. Finally, we have a mechanism. The mechanism that drives biological evolution, natural selection, was first put forward in separate publications by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace in 1859. Darwin was the first to publish, so he is attributed with the concept. Darwin's natural selection is a three-step process. First, more individuals are produced each generation than can survive. Second, it requires production of variation. Thirdly, selection for survival is not random. In the natural world, selection is not for a trait. Selection is negative or against a trait. Think about Lamarck's giraffes. If drought causes loss of foliage and the only food source is the foliage that remains at the top of trees, then giraffes with longer necks are well fed and survive to reproduce and pass on their traits, while the giraffes with shorter necks end up starving and dying. There are three patterns in evolution that Darwin identified. The first is homology, which is the existence of shared ancestry between a pair of structures or genes in different species. The second is vestigial structures, which are genetically determined structures or attributes that have apparently lost most or all of their ancestral function in a given species, but they have been retained through evolution. The third pattern is ontogeny, also called embryology, which is the similarity of the origin and development of organisms during early embryonic changes and at times through certain stages of adulthood. Homologous structures are morphological features in biological organisms that have a similar position and evolutionary origin, but not necessarily identical structures or the same function. For a good example of homology, let's look at this illustration of the forelimbs of several vertebrates. The green bones are the humerus or upper arm bone. The red is the radius, the blue is the ulna of the lower arm, and the tan bones are the wrist bones and fingers. Although these limbs may have different functions, for example, a wing or a flipper or a leg, they are all derived from the same tissue. This suggests a common ancestor for all vertebrates. And if you trace this downward from the lizard to the frog to the fossil amphibian, you find these same bones in early lobe-finned fishes. A vestigial structure is a structure in an organism that is usually reduced in size or function compared to the homologue in earlier species of the evolutionary lineage. They are usually in the process of disappearing. These are examples of vestigial structures. On the left, at the top, you can see the pelvis and thigh bones of whales and snakes are still there, even though they no longer have hind limbs. They're in the process of disappearing. On the bottom is a human skeleton. The coccyx, commonly called the tailbone, is just that. It is a vestigial structure, the remnants of a tail. Ontogeny, or embryonic history, indicates a common ancestor. All vertebrate embryos in the top row start out similarly with gill slits and a long tail. You would be hard-pressed to determine a pig embryo from a human embryo at this first stage of development. It is not until stage 3 that you could determine easily which is which. More recent evidence of evolution can be seen in small evolutionary changes made in fruit flies in the lab, in the resistance of insects to pesticides, and the resistance of bacteria to antibiotics. Let's kind of step through the evolution of disease-causing bacteria as an example. Patient 1 becomes ill. He has a bacteria base load that is mostly sensitive to an antibiotic. The sensitive bacteria in patient 1 are killed and the person gets well, but he passes the infection to patient 2, who receives a greater number of resistant bacteria plus a mutation that evolved during patient 1's treatment. The base of patient 2's infection has a base population of bacteria that is still susceptible to the antibiotic. Patient 3, however, gets infected with resistant bacteria as the base of his infection population. He takes antibiotics that do not work, and when patient 4 gets infected, he becomes more ill than the previous patient. This is the end of part 1. In part 2 of biological evolution, we are going to look at how natural selection works and the discovery of genetics.